The hyperinflation that occurred in Zimbabwe during the turn of the century is one of the most fascinating recent economic phenomena. Let's take a look at what happened. To understand what happened in Zimbabwe, we must first understand what is hyperinflation. Hyperinflation is basically extreme levels of inflation. There have only been 55 recorded cases of hyperinflation in the world during the 20th century, so it's pretty rare. Some other countries to have experienced it include China, Germany, Russia, Hungary, and Argentina. So how does hyperinflation happen? Hyperinflation only tends to occur in two situations: depressions and in the aftermath of war. During a depression, when GDP has stalled or is even shrinking and the money supply is increased, an imbalance occurs between money supplied and the money demanded. This can result in hyperinflation if corrective actions are not taken swiftly. In the aftermath of war, sometimes confidence can be lost in the ability of a currency to maintain its value. Due to this lack of confidence in the currency, sellers demand a risk premium to accept this currency, which results in increased prices. This situation can soon spiral into hyperinflation, as has happened in Germany and Yugoslavia in the past. So what and who were responsible for the hyperinflation seen in Zimbabwe? Robert Mugabe was the president of Zimbabwe, a dictator of an extremely corrupt and poorly run government who seemed more concerned with lining the pockets of himself and his allies than providing a stable economy for his citizens. During his tenure as president, he continually increased taxation on just about everything to fund his wars and pay his generals. This left his people with little disposable income and scared away most of the foreign direct investment that had previously been attracted to Zimbabwe. In the late 1990s, the Zimbabwean government also introduced a series of land reforms. This involved redistributing land from the existing white farmers to black farmers. But with little experience, the new farmers struggled to produce food, and there was a large fall in food production. Similar policies were introduced to other sectors of the economy, including the manufacturing sector. The economy experienced a sharp fall in output due to these factors, and this caused a collapse in bank lending. The government began increasing the rate at which they were printing money, which increased the money supply. This started with printing money to finance a war in the Congo, and also to increase salaries of government officials and soldiers. But as the economic crisis worsened, printing money became a very short-term solution to try and cover their liabilities. With the economy in decline, government debt increased. To finance the higher debt, the government responded by printing yet more money, which caused yet more inflation. Inflation meant bondholders saw a fall in the value of their bonds, and so it was hard to sell future debt. We can see the effects of these policies graphically in Figure 1. Demand rose from D1 to D2 due to increases in the money supply, so people essentially demanded more goods with this new money. However, supply also fell from S1 to S2 due to the economic crisis and increases in taxation. This resulted in an increase in the price level from P1 to P2 and a shrinkage in national output from Q1 to Q2. And guess how the government responded to these rising prices? They simply printed more money. So what was the result? With more money in the economy, the purchasing power of the Zimbabwean dollar began to fall. And as prices continued to rise, the government began printing more money so people could afford these new higher prices. As more money was printed, prices rose further, and so on and so forth. This effectively became a very dangerous feedback loop which drove hyperinflation. As you can see from Table 1, the rates of inflation were astronomical. At the peak of hyperinflation, prices were rising by as much as 98% per day. This meant that any currency you received in the morning would be worth considerably less that very evening. At the very peak of hyperinflation, The year-on-year inflation rate was over 89 sextillion%. As the purchasing power of the Zimbabwean dollar continued to decrease, the government had to start printing higher and higher denomination notes. At the height of inflation, in late 2008, the Zimbabwean printing press was actually printing $100 trillion bills. So how did this affect the people of Zimbabwe? Firstly, people could not afford even basic goods. In some cases, salaries had risen to multiple billions of dollars per year, but what good is that if a loaf of bread costs $2 billion on its own? Secondly, there was no credit available anywhere. Banks had pretty much ceased to exist and were unwilling to lend money to anyone. Thirdly, anyone who received money had to exchange it for a foreign currency right away or would lose value of that money throughout the day. For example, a bus journey from work would cost considerably more than the same journey to work that morning. If you had any savings in Zimbabwean dollars and you were unable to exchange them to a foreign currency, your savings essentially became worthless. Many people lost their entire life savings. Lastly, it disrupted normal economic activity and saw the GDP of Zimbabwe shrink, affecting investors for a long time who had completely lost confidence in Zimbabwe. Eventually, Mugabe bowed to pressure and stopped printing Zimbabwean dollars and allowed the use of foreign currency, primarily the US dollar. So what's the current situation in Zimbabwe? Well, they're still using the US dollar as their main form of currency. Robert Mugabe has finally bowed to international pressure to leave office after more than 30 years, and the new president, Emerson Mnangagwa, is looking to build up gold and diamond reserves to back a possible currency relaunch.